sign of his people. Think, Lord, you mean all of this that is important for our salvation is all going to be wiped away? And Jesus says, oh yes, it will. It will all go. We're back on. And I want you to see the progression now as we make our way through each part of this particular chapter. The first thing he says is this. And I want you to understand that in apocalyptic literature, avoid making mistakes of trying to map situations from your present day onto the text. That's eisegesis. You're reading back into the text something that happened. I tell people all the time, there are three ways that you can actually interpret apocalyptic literature. The first way is this. It's finished, it's done, it's already taken place. So you just read it as saying Jesus knew something about history, and that was the end of that. And I think it's far more deeper than that. That's why he stresses this to his disciples. The second way is that people begin to say, oh, well, you know, when Jesus said this, he was talking to us in 2021. And I have a problem with that, people, because what you're telling me is that if I'm a disciple and you just finished telling me that the temple is about to be totally destroyed, but hey, the master coming back in 2021. How that can help me? And I'm living in the first century of the Christian era. Okay? That's like me telling you all, deliverance is coming in 2035. And most of you all, being good Anglicans, you'll probably sit there with your mask behind over your mouth and go, I'm interested in that. I need something to help me right here and right now. Okay? And I want you to recognize the fact that the second flaw of this method in terms of interpreting apocalyptic literature is trying to say it's going to happen centuries later. And I find that there are plenty of people who are sitting down and making a ton of money off of Christians by telling them, listen, you hear about earthquakes, you hear about this, you hear about that. Jesus said it, and it's happening right here and right now. Excuse me, people. Whatever Jesus was telling was for the sake of encouraging his disciples back then in the first century. What happens when they begin to do this? They begin to dismantle the text. So they got to shuffle things around to make sure that it fits the pattern that has been happening in the world. So that they're able to say, well, you see, in 1972, this is what happened, and then this is what happened in 1980, this is what happened here, and this is what happened here. And you have to create a whole brand new sketch of what the scriptures is supposed to be like. And I often have to say to people, come on, stop, because that's not it. I don't think God is going to send me a message and tell me, Basil, keep on pressing on. I'm going to show up in 2065. You know how old I can be if I'm still around? God, I'm no good to you, Dad. I'm finished. So I want you to understand that apocalyptic literature is intended to encourage people in the generation in which it is spoken. Please write it down somewhere. Oh, for God's sake, please. I hear people getting into Revelation, and the thing is upset the living daylights out of me. Because we got Jesus ascending into heaven, well, 3 times in some places. Okay? They got a whole schedule altogether. And the problem is that even the book of Revelation is divided up into 7 visions made up of 7 parts apiece. And if you don't know where to draw the lines in Revelation, you're going to read it from chapter 21, go all the way to chapter 22, and believe it's a continuous story, and it isn't. It's all about symbolism. Symbolism intended to encourage the people of that generation. I sit down sometimes and people tell me, oh, Father, I'm scared. They tell me this is what that picture looks like and that creature looks like and the rest of it. I tell them, stop it. Don't scare yourself. God is not into that. What he wants to do is to make sure that you and I understand that symbols are given to encourage us, no matter how tough life may get. In other words, when I read Daniel, when I read Revelation, when I read what Jesus has to say here now, I can sit up, look up, because I know my redemption is drawing nigh. Okay? Regardless of whatever troubles I go through, hey, God got this. God has you. Hello? He has you. So if you look at the passage carefully, when Jesus finished telling them that all the symbolism of the temple, it will be wiped away and nothing will be left, the disciples already go in a panic mode. Lord, when is this going to happen? And Jesus turns around to them and says to them, hold on now. Let me tell you some other deep stuff will come before the end. You will end up with people who are false messiahs, who are going to make false predictions, who are going to tell you all sorts of things about the end. But I want you to understand, even when they come, the end still is not near. In other words, you need to make sure that you have the right attitude in order to face whatever trials, troubles, persecution should come your way. And therefore, this is an attitude check in terms of the chapter that is set before us. You got a picture, everybody? So I want you to write down on top of your page, chapter 21, attitude check. Hallelujah. And then he tells them, you think things bad? They get worse? And I want you to look at it carefully, what he says up until verse 11. He says, listen, this world will be thrown into tumult. Nations will rise up against nations. Kingdoms will rise up against kingdoms. He goes on, he says, things will be so bad, even Mother Nature getting the picture. And things out of whack altogether. And when you see these things occurring, and when you watch the heavens being shaken, in other words, you see the stars out there, they look like they're in the right order, but all of a sudden everything seems to be totally out of whack. And I get people really don't understand this. Jesus is saying, stop wasting your time looking at the trouble. Keep your focus on the only one who can make a difference in this life. Hello? I hope you're writing it down somewhere, because some of us, the problem is we looking at our circumstances and we're not focusing on who God is and what he is capable of doing. How many of y'all remember the story of Chicken Licken? Chicken Licken from the Royal Readers. And I probably want to put your hand up because it'll probably tell your age too. Chicken Licken, Henny Penny, Ducky Lucky. Remember, Chicken Licken got hit in his head with an acorn, which was only about so big. And he went through the whole farmyard screaming and hollering, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And he convinced all of the animals in the farmyard that the sky was falling. So they need to go to the king to tell the king that the sky is falling. And so all the animals pack up and they head out, and on their way they meet Foxy Loxy. And Foxy Loxy says to them, "Oh yeah, the sky's falling all right. I tell you what, y'all come and take a shortcut through my den, and that'll take you straight to the king." Well, you know how that story ends, right? They were all eaten up. Because unfortunately, they focused on the circumstances rather than seeing the bigger picture in life. It's just like us Christians, we take our little molehill and we turn it into a huge mountain. And we forget that there's a God who says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, what would you say to the mountain? Move, mountain, and it will be moved. Jesus is trying to get them to focus on developing the right attitude. So in verse 12 to 19, he says to them, because you are my followers, because you've been faithful, you are the ones who are going to face persecution. You're going to suffer for my sake. And you better be prepared, because even your own family will sacrifice you. Are you serious about that? Yes. Even your own flesh and blood will do you in. And yet, what Jesus says, what's far more important, is that you learn to endure to the very end. Those who endure shall be saved. Okay? And so endurance becomes extremely important in apocalyptic literature. I hope you write that word down, put a box around it, put stars around it, because one of the things we have discovered, particularly in Christianity in the 21st century, is people give up too easily. We throw in the towel. The first thing, when things don't work out the way, oh, I rebuked it, I said I wasn't going to speak it, I wasn't going to. This and nothing got nothing to do with it. God's testing your faith. I always tell people, one of the greatest principles that I learned in science is a term called elasticity. When you take a rubber band and you stretch that rubber band so far, it may thin out a bit, but when you let that rubber band go, what happens to the rubber band? Goes right back into shape. And the same thing is true about what God does with us. He stretches us sometimes beyond what we think we are able to bear. Hello, this is for somebody in this church tonight. He stretches us beyond what we are able to bear. And yet when we think we've reached the end, he's there and he releases the pressure and whap, everything just comes back together. And he works his purpose and his plan out in terms of our lives. Jesus says, be one, ready for persecution. 2, be ready for betrayal. But also, be ready to be persistent. Endure, people. Endure whatever it is. And then the only clear prediction that we have from Jesus is in verse 20 to 24, with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Put down this date, please. In 70 AD, you see, after Jesus' crucifixion, about 40 years later, the Jews decided they were going to have an outright rebellion against the Romans. And there were people who gathered on the Temple Mount. And they expected God to appear, to beat down their enemies, and to take over. And the Romans had had enough. And the Romans entered the city of Jerusalem. Not only did they destroy the temple and literally run it into the ground, they destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem, tore down the majority of the walls, and they built a Gentile city on top of the ruins of Jerusalem. And so Jesus was right in his prediction that even the sacred city had its day and had its time. And when I read it, there is something else that catches my attention. He's now said it not once, but twice in this chapter. He's told them, you see all these pretty stones? Bram! They'll all go to the ground. And now he's come a second time and said to them, the Gentiles will run it over. In other words, the very thing that you put your trust in is going to be the thing that God takes out of the picture altogether. When that happens, people become fearful. I tell you that. They become fearful because they're wondering, how could God let this happen? How could this happen to us? And yet people, just because of circumstances or difficulties or problems, I want us to understand that, hey, there's a God above who takes away the things that we trust in most. I wonder, and God forbid this ever happen, what would happen if St. Matthew's burned down? Think about that. Do you think we'd be able to get everybody to come on this spot and still be able to give God the glory and to praise him? I'm asking you all a question. Why y'all say it so bold? Seriously. They want a building to worship in. They want another church. And the stones ain't to save you. The benches don't save you. Now I can say something to you all that the disciples of Jesus needed to learn. There's a difference between two important words. For us as Christians, we must never forget it. Okay? The first word is Kurikon. K-U-R-K-O-N. Kurikon are the things that belong to God. Touch the pew you're sitting in. Tap it. Tap your feet on the floor. Those of you near the wall, tap the sidewalk. Okay? Those of you near the pillars, touch the pillars. Okay? I'm standing on the red carpet. See, Kurikon are the things that are not alive. They may have been dedicated to the Lord, but they're not alive. They don't give you life. They're dead. What is important to God is what we call the ecclesia. E-C-C-L-E-S-I-A. And it refers to the gathered, faithful community of God engaged in mission. So the real St. Matthew's ain't the furniture, it ain't the building, it's not the walls, The real St. Matthew's is what? Is us. The people. And wherever my people meet, there they behold your mercy seat. In other words, it doesn't matter if everything is wiped away, we still have God and we still have each other. You get the picture, everybody? And so that becomes ultimately important. And what Jesus is trying to get across to his disciples is, hey, look, the reality is this, that all this thing that you've built up over these many years, this temple which Herod gave you all as a political gift, because don't forget the temple that they were worshiping in was created by Herod, who could not worship in it because he happened to be an Idumean Jew, a half-breed. That's why he built his palace close enough and made sure when they designed the temple that he was able to stand on the roof of his palace and look over the wall of the temple and see what is going on in terms of sacrifices and point his tongue out at them and say, there, you think you're keeping away from me, eh? I see just what's going on. And don't forget, he also created another temple a couple hundred miles to the north in the city of Caesarea Philippi to please his Roman masters. He was a master politician. He knew how to use his power to play off people. Oh, my Roman masters, I can put up a temple in the city to their pagan god, and they'll love me for that. Let me go down the road and do the same thing for these half disgusting Jews, and they'll love me for that too. But Jesus says it will all be gone, all wiped away. Verse 25 to 33. Jesus tells his disciples that despite all of the confusion, despite everything that's happening, look forward to one thing, and that is the day of your redemption. The Son of Man will come. There's no need to doubt or fear that. He will come. And when he does, you need to be ready. Even though the world may be in tumult, he tells them to do something. Look up. The problem with most people when they're going through trials and trouble, you need to watch people's posture on a Sunday morning. There's some people who come to St. Matthew's, and when they walk through the door, the rest of the world may be around them. But their head is where? And you can almost say, what's the problem? They're burdened with something. And it's got them because their focus is, let me just make the next step go. I just need to get to that next step. But Jesus tells them, raise your head, look up. In other words, change your perspective on life and realize that my redemption is going to draw nigh. So I'm not going to be downcast over my soul. I'm going to put my trust in God, for he is the help of my countenance and my God, the psalmist says. You get the picture, everybody? And so you need to be able to see Jesus trying to encourage them in the midst of all this apocalyptic literature. The rest of the world may be in tumult. The rest of the world may not seem to have a plan, but I can tell you something right now. God always has a plan. He knows exactly what he's up to and what he's doing, and he knows exactly how he's going to get them out of this particular situation. And then he says to them, look. He uses two parables. Look at your two parables that he mentions. What are the two parables that he uses? In verse 25 to 33. Look at the fig tree. Okay, you're looking at the fig tree. What does he say? As soon as it starts to sprout leaves, you know what? Summer's coming. And then what he says after that? Hmm? When you see these things happening, know that your God is near, nearer than you think. Okay? And he's always talking about this nearness of God when it comes to the kingdom. It is not something abstract and removed from us, but something very near and very present among us. In other words, God will fulfill his purpose regardless of whatever transpires and whatever takes place. The disciples must do two things, though. And he's been saying this all the way from chapter 13 up to now. Be watchful and be alert. You remember all those parables that he used, where he used the example of them saying, you make sure you're on duty that when the master shows up, whenever he decides to show up, that he will find you doing what you're supposed to be doing. I just came from doing a taping with Archbishop Gomez for a program that he has on Jones Network. And one of the things that we talked about is the fact that is the church in our day being watchful and alert? Are we as Christians really being attentive, being involved, getting down to the nitty-gritty, and understanding, listen, no matter how long it takes for him to come, we need to be ready. There's a song that they used to play on the radio. I noticed they stopped playing it these days. I pray we all be ready. You remember that song? And it talks about the mother and the children, and it talks about, all the other things that are happening and how one is snatched away and one left behind. And the thing that I really say to people is not so much this concept of what people now call the rapture. But the point is this, that you and I, day by day, must be ready and alert and getting on with the master's duty and not trifling. Because we may lose our moment of grace and our opportunity if we do not understand that we are to be alert and watchful in the midst of everything. Get the picture, everybody? Finally, when Jesus has finished his teaching, he moves always to the place of teaching, to the place of prayer, until he goes to the Mount of Olives, where he retreats to pray with his disciples. Because he knows the next day he is going to encounter a crowd that is hungry for the word of the living God. I'm going to stop there because there are people who have questions about the apocalyptic literature. And I'm sure you all want to ask questions because I spiked your come to check the system for us. See, when I got into the study of apocryphal literature, I realized that people were using it to scare a lot of people. And I often say to people, God does not want you to choose him out of fear. God is not a fear, not a God of fear. He's a God of love. And he wants us to choose him out of love. Okay? And so we need to understand that apocalyptic literature is not about scaring people into salvation, but helping us to understand that regardless of how rotten this world becomes, we still have a sure rock on which to stand. We have a God who will keep us safe, regardless of whatever. And whatever happened to us, we can rest assured that whether this life or the life to come, we know He has our interests at heart. And He will work it out for our good and for His honor and for His glory's sake. So let me stop there, because I'm sure there's some of you all who have read through Daniel and you get terrified by certain things in terms of Daniel. The unfortunate thing is that because I didn't teach you all Old Testament, it's so hard for me to fill in all the gaps, but I have to make sure that we try and use this opportunity to help you all to fill in whatever gaps needed to be done. Yes, sir.
You said that a parent built a temple. What about the one who saw the
See, when you think about the temple, I want you to recognize several things. They started off first with the tent of meeting within the wilderness, which they would pack up and move on. That's why you had three categories of Levites. There were the one set of Levites who looked after the sacred vessels. The other one was responsible for taking down the temple, the tent of meeting, the curtains and whatnot. And the final group was responsible for taking out the crud, all of the messes and whatnot, from the animals and the blood and all the leftovers, ashes and whatnot. The Levites and the priests were responsible for looking after the temple. By the time you get to David's time, David has determined in his heart he wants to build a temple. And God says, noted. Solomon builds the temple. Do not forget, and I need to say this to you all. I need a small box or something. Just to show you all something. Just, ladies, if you have a powder, yes, that will do. That will do. That will do. Sorry, it was me. If this box represented Solomon's temple, this sheet of paper represented Solomon's house. So you tell me what was important to Solomon. Okay? Any man who is going to go through a series of marriages for political reasons, plus have 700 concubines or sweethearts on the side living under the same roof, the house had to be big. Okay? Do not forget he had 300 wives and 700 concubines living under the single roof. So no way under God's heaven did you get to spend one night with every girl in the house. Okay? That should tell you something about Solomon. He may have lived wrong, but he may have lived long, but he lived wrong. Okay? And I want to point out to you all, thank you. Thank you. I want to point out to you all that Solomon receives one of the worst ratings by the Deuteronomic historian, because the Deuteronomic historian realized that Solomon's wives turned his heart away from the Lord. And so what happened is that on top of his large house, he then turned the top roof into a huge sanctuary so his wives could have shrines on the top dedicated to Marduk, Baal, Asherah, all the gods that they brought from their foreign lands. They put them all on the roof of his house. And they encouraged Solomon to worship. And that's why Solomon is given such a bad rating. When I hear people go to the lodge and come back to me and tell me how great Solomon was and how fantastic and how wonderful, and then I open up my Bible and I said, would you like to read this particular passage? And you can see why there was a problem, because by the time his reign ended, his son Rehoboam, the people in the north said to him, come son, come, we need to have a talk, because your daddy put hell on us in terms of taxes. Okay? He went to them and they said to him, you take the taxes off, you could be king over us. He went back to Jerusalem, found the old men, and the old man said, you got to do what they ask you to do, if you can keep your kingdom together. And he didn't like that, so he went to his young jacks. And his young jacks tell him, you go back and tell them people, my pa used to beat you all with whips, but I can cut you all skin with scorpions. And immediately, the kingdom of the 12 tribes divided into two. The people in the north, the 10 tribes in the north, they established their own temple. So you had a temple at Bethel, and you had a temple also in Samaria. The problem is that the temple in Jerusalem is still going, but it's only looking after the 2 tribes in the south. The Assyrians come along, they destroy the temples in the north, and carry the people in the north off into exile, never to be seen of again. That leaves only the Jerusalem temple. And then in 597 BC, the Babylonians come over the city wall and they destroy Jerusalem, well, not totally, but they capture it for the first time in 597. Then in 587, because Zedekiah decided that he wanted to join up with the Egyptians and try to play the idiot, so he decided, let me go with the Egyptians because they can save us. And the Babylonians come back and they mash Jerusalem into the ground and they destroy the Solomon temple. The temple stays in ruins for a long period of time until Ezra and Nehemiah come. And Ezra and Nehemiah are responsible for establishing what then becomes known as the third temple. Sorry, the second temple. Okay? Again, everything was going fine. They decided they were going to rebel against their new foreign masters. And once again, the temple is badly ruined or almost totally destroyed. And so by the time you get to Herod's day, the temple really has to be rebuilt. And so he takes the next 38, 48 years to try and put up a structure which he knows will please the Jews. And he will finance it, even though he himself cannot enter into it. All right? So when you think about Solomon's temple, that would have been during the time before they went off in exile to Babylon. You also had another temple that was rebuilt, whose glory didn't even compare to what Solomon's temple looked like. And then after that, that was destroyed, and then you eventually end up with Herod in the third temple, building the third temple in order to cater to the people of that particular region. And what Jesus is trying to say is, there even going to be no temple no more. Everything's going to be scratched off the face of the earth and wiped out because God is determined. He's going to take away the very thing that they're putting their trust in. In fact, may God forgive me for saying this, but I think the Jews should count it a blessing that they never put the temple back in place. Because if it did, there would have been plenty of blood running out in the streets of Jerusalem from that temple. Because if you consider how many sacrifices you have to undertake each day, okay? The people would have to go there to cut animal throats, gain the blood, and then splash it on the horns of the altar. And then when it came for libation offerings, when people had to give strong drink or wine, they would come with at least a gallon of wine to have it poured on the horns of the altar. Now there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There's one person, 20 of us. That's 20 gallons of wine that you were about to go pour on the altar, on the horns of the altar, and it runs down the trough and starts to run out of the temple area. I could guarantee you, knowing Nassau, there'd be some people beating down the road. Okay? Imagine if you had, like the Sunday one, we had 100 and some odd people who came to give libation offering. I might as well tell you that they're singing, "Shall we gather the river?" But they gathered for the wrong reason. Okay? And I tell people all that sacrificial system was wiped away so that they could get into the Word and be rooted and grounded in the Word. And thank God for the synagogue, because the synagogue then took over where the temple was left off and moved out of the way. Any other questions? I've determined tonight that if we don't get on to chapter 22, that's fine, because we need to cover this properly. There are too many of you all who have heard people preach sermons on popular literature, and they've scared the living daylights out of you. Herbert W. Armstrong, for instance, used to have a program that used to come on Sunday afternoon, where you would have all these creatures and these pictures and these strange-looking things, and you'd sit down there as a child and you'd watch and you'd say to yourself, "But Jesus, God would come," and I'm terrified, I'm scared to death. And we're missing the point. It's not the animals. It's the symbolism that lies behind it that tells us quite plainly that at the end of the day, every one of those 7 visions that make up the book of Revelation, they tell us quite plainly, never mind the conflict, never mind the confusion, never mind the distress. If you know God, you know He is going to look after His own, and they will come out safely in the end. Okay? And that's the reason why I'm trying to write this book on the book of Revelation, because I want people to stop looking at the images and not understanding the symbols when they need to understand the basic message behind the apocalyptic. Inside the sacristy, in the closet, the closet on the side, up on the top, there's a symbol.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
If we go back to chapters 8 to 11, I believe that that is where all the fair is created based on the new set of challenges.
Say it again.
Chapter 8 and 11 is where the fair is fascinating for us at this time because of the things that we are seeing. Like just recently, the tornado that struck in Kentucky, the earthquake in Haiti. And so they're saying that these things will happen at the end time. And what are we to gather from it? Because we realize there's a lot of learning to do and preparation to be made.
And you see, the other thing that I want to add to it is this. Jesus tells us quite plainly, it is not for you to know the day, nor the time, nor the season, not even the Son of Man knows that. So Jesus didn't concern himself with it. Why is it that the church is so preoccupied with pinning down date and time? When we had the celebration of the new millennium, there was a woman down in the Grove who bought a ladder and climbed up on the ladder. This is New Year's Eve, 1999. And she said that she wanted to climb up the ladder because she wanted to be the first to see Jesus when he came back. And when my parishioners told me this story, I said, well, I hope and pray to God they got her down from there. Because 2000 came and went. and he was not there. And the problem is that we begin to look for messianic figures. Thank you. We begin looking for messianic figures. And the problem is that we begin to follow these supposedly messianic figures that leads the faithful astray. You end up with people like Jim Jones, where you have over 900 people drink poison Kool-Aid and believe, hey, that's okay. The young man in Texas, remember who put all the gasoline around the place and David? Waco, Texas, with David Koresh, and all of that nonsense that went on with regards to that. And I always tell people that what happens is that what people need to understand is this, and I want y'all to write this down somewhere. People, struggle is a part of your Christian journey and life. If somebody tell you, don't say it, don't speak it, just rebuke it. I can tell you something right now. Jesus himself knew that struggle was a part of his own journey in his own life. And Jesus made it clear to us. He said, if it happened to the master, it will also happen to the servant as well. Number two, and this is the most painful one that most of us do not recognize. And I'm going to stop for this evening. The second thing is this. We need to recognize that many a times when we're going through stressful situations, sometimes there is a divine no from God. What? Divine no, N-O. No from God. How do I know that there is such a thing? Jesus asked for it. He knelt in the garden and he said, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you want. And God gave him his answer the next day in terms of the cross. See, there are plenty of people who believe that God always supposed to say yes, yes to every request. He does not. And we have to come to grips in reality that the God that we serve, whatever decision he makes, it's always in our best interest. It always will serve his greater purpose. And in the way you and I know fully well that if he's God, he's going to work it out for the good of his children. St. Paul himself knew about that divine love. He had a thorn in his flesh. We don't know what it was. Was it sickness? Was it temptation? Was it something? And many asked God to relieve him from it. God said, no, my grace is sufficient. And he had to endure it. Okay? The third thing that I find almost disturbing is that we've developed a Christianity where people believe after you find Jesus, everything's supposed to be so hunky-dory, so sweet, no rough roads, no difficult paths, no mountains to climb. You're just gonna ease on down the road. Not so, people. I always tell people, the only way you grow is to go. And when you go, be prepared for the road to be rough. Okay? And my wife is the walker. She's the exerciser in the family. Okay? She got a little tracker on that tell me how many miles she walked. And when she come back, I gotta listen to the story. Thank God Christoph to understand how all the story goes. That we two of us suffering. Okay? But the point is this, that every day she tries to excel further than where she went before. Let's face the fact, people. Most of us, we get to a stage, oh, well, I don't do that. I think I will do no more than that. And we stop right where we are. When God sometimes has greater things in store for us, if we would just push ourselves a little bit more in His grace and understand that He's working it out for our good and for His purpose. Okay? I need us. Go ahead.
You saw that image going around with the UN, that story, Revelation, that little image with this like lion and the wings and everything.
Oh, you mean the cherub that they mistakenly used for something else?
I think it's something to do with the United Nations. Some symbol like that.
They put the
Yep. The cherub that I saw, the picture I saw, the cherub are the ones that put up the throne. Which was this? Of giant. Oh, jaguar. Well, I know about no jaguar, but I know if it's a cherub, there was the throne. They were placed around the throne of God's throne. And I tell people all the time, see, part of the apocalyptic picture, when you go back and read it, is Ezekiel, the first 3 chapters. And what people don't understand is the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel talk about the eye and the wheel and the wheel and the wheel and all the rest of it. All of that imagery is to show how God is riding His chariot and He's in charge. Oh, I never say that. Mm-hmm. But those animals always did so in terms of being at the base of the throne of God. In other words, they're subject to Him. So the cherub, the seraphim, all of them, they were being serving God's purpose in God's scheme of things. And I often have to say to people, when you read about the angels and this one pouring out this trumpet and that one and this bowl and the next, you need to understand that in a real sense what the author is trying to say to you is that whatever befalls us in this life, God got His hand. And He knows exactly what He's up to. And He's working it out for our good and for His honor and for His glory's sake. One day, when we all stand around that glorious throne, and we all gather at that eternal table to share in the heavenly banquet, we can have plenty stories to tell about how we know the awesomeness of the God we serve, and how He has rescued us and saved us while we have made the journey from here to eternity. You get the picture, everybody? Okay? Any other questions? I figured this was going to happen because when I started to go over this, I said, Lord, I should have just stuck to 1 chapter tonight rather than trying to do 2. Okay? So when we come back, we will deal with chapter 22. After God's willing, the New Year's celebration. And just so, let me say this to you all. Hardship, pain, suffering, heartache, heartbreak, sorrows, all of it is a part of life for us as Christians. Yet in the midst of it all, we are people who know joy, J-O-Y, which does not depend upon circumstances, situations, because it anticipates. It says, God, I know I captured him, but this is not your last word on my situation. And I know you are going to work it out for my good. I know at the end of the day, like St. Paul, you'll be able to say, all things work together to the good of them that love the Lord, that are called according to his purpose. Okay? If God be for us, he who did not spare his only son, but gave him as the ransom for us, think what more he can do for us. And you see, if we really begin to focus and believe the word, and I tell people all the time, you know, people say to me, I had a friend who came to see me and said, you ain't give up yet? And I said, no, I haven't. And I don't intend to. I said, I've discovered so many things. One of the greatest things that I discovered in my later years as a priest is I discovered it by going through the Stations of the Cross. I'd come over to the church building and walk from cross to cross, from station to station, because it helped me to begin to grapple with what Jesus went through. And I asked God, please give me the heart and the mind of Christ, so that whatever I have to endure in life, I know that God is going to use it for his greater good, for his honor and for his glory. Okay? Preparing now for next year, because I really believe there are too many of us who go through Stations of the Cross only because we've been going through it for years without ever coming to the point of understanding, hey, this is your journey. There can be days when people falsely accuse you. There can be days when people judge you. There can be days when people tie you up and drag you where you don't want to go. There can be days when you carry a burden that ain't yours. It's almost like you carrying everybody else's own, but not yours. There's going to be a day when you will feel forsaken and all left alone. There's going to be a day when you're going to go and you feel that the world really has treated you terribly and awfully. There's going to be days like that, people, but thanks be to God, we have somebody who's already gone that way. And like the book of Hebrews says, in Hebrews chapter 2 and in chapter 4, it says, we already have a high priest who has passed this way, who has gone into the heavens, who stands at the right hand of God to plead your case and mine, so that we can know the victory that is in store for us as his children. Any other questions before we close tonight? Okay? Please, people, enjoy your holidays. But at the same time, I always tell every Bible study group I teach, remember, Jesus is the reason. Okay? Hello? Jesus alone. Fill this holiday season with worship. Keep your focus on him. Things may be tough, yes. But after you leave this classroom tonight, walk outside, walk up the passageway. And when you get in your car, I want you to scream and holler, Jesus, I will rejoice. I shall rejoice. Because I know who has my future in his hands. Okay? Go home today, and even if the light off, rejoice. Because the God you serve knows exactly what you're going through. Okay? I'll never forget a little old lady in Bunches in Long Island who used to stand outside of her house And whenever I come to visit, she would insist that we sing the hymn, Does Jesus Care? Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. His heart is touched by my grief. And I want to say to you all, please, keep it's a holiday, but holiday equals holy day. That's where we get the word holiday from. Let's keep it holy unto the Lord. All right, everybody? I can challenge you all in that regard, because some of us believe it's all about partying and food and running up and down all over the place, rather than preparing ourselves for the greater weight of glory that is yet to come. Okay? I look around and I see struggling with, the pandemic, we're struggling with this new virus, we're struggling with the variation, we're struggling with so much. The point is, the end of the day, my God's still in charge. And one day we can pass through this. This too will pass. We serve the living God who is looking after us. Father in heaven, we want to give you the glory this evening, because we have come to a crisis moment. Everything seems to be crumbling around us. The order of life, tools for governing. We look at weather conditions that are shifting and changing, and even Mother Nature seems to be out of whack. But thanks be to your name. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever. You hear the cries of your children and your people, and you answer us. Keep our focus, Lord Jesus, in the midst of the storms of life. And help us day by day to face life's difficulty, knowing fully well that you are the one who will bring us safely through. Whatever you have decided, and whatever the answer is to our petition, your name be glorified, because it will be the best for us in whatever way you decide. We give you the glory even now. Watch over every soul in this place. Let no harm, no danger come to them or their household, Lord Jesus. Heal those who are wearied in body, mind, and spirit. Strengthen those who have lost hope. And in your power and your might, help us to leave this place filled with a sense of joy, knowing fully well that with Jesus first, others next, and ourselves last, we will fulfill your purpose in this life. Do, Lord Jesus, prepare our hearts and minds when we come back after the break, that we may indeed dig deeper into your word, and help us to move away from any form of tokenism, that our hearts may be totally sold out for you. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. God bless you all. Have a blessed Christmas. And the Lord go with you all.